Hello and welcome to another Times Radio Frontline members question and answer. Now today we're answering comments from our channel members on Frontline episodes and other videos about the war in Ukraine and its impact on the world stage. I'm Philip Ingram. I'm one of the presenters for Times Radio Frontline, but I'm a former senior British military intelligence officer and now global commentator on all matters geopolitics, defence, security, cyber, terrorism and anything else that people ask me to comment on. Now, getting straight into your comments, Smart Gran, welcome back. I don't think we've had some comments from you for the past couple of weeks. You start off by asking, why do we talk about bargaining with Putin and deals? A very nasty word when Putin invaded a sovereign country, and the only solution for Russia to withdraw, whoever is left in power, appear before an international court and Russia pay reparations. Smart Gran, you're 100% right. There's actually at the minute no point in talking to Putin. But we have to recognize that war is diplomacy by other means. And war and fighting are there to set the conditions to get people back to the diplomatic table and to talk. So any form of talking that shortens the fighting period is important. And whenever it comes to diplomacy is all about doing deals. So no matter how much we dislike the other side, no matter what they have done wrong, at some stage you have to talk. We're seeing that between the international community and Hamas in Gaza. We're seeing talks going on continuously about actions in Southeast Asia from China. We're seeing talks between India and Pakistan. Talking is the way that conflicts are resolved. Ideally, conflicts are not started because talking goes right. It's when the talking stops and the talking goes wrong that people start fighting. So it's just a simple fact of life that we have to bargain with Putin and do some deals. But hopefully the final deal means that he is pushed back into a corner and he's overthrown by his own people, who then hold him up and help send him to the International Criminal Court. But let's see. I think that is a long way off. So Astro, and Astro, you say you're clearly being a tad sarcastic. Or was that Louis, the producer, putting that beside your comments? You say, I can only speak about American politicians who are never corrupt, aren't money, power grabbers, willing to say anything and do almost anything to get into and to stay in office. This is what allows us to judge other countries. What? Cynical? Quite right, Philip. A cynic is a disappointed realist. Well, yes, a cynic is a disappointed realist. And I think you're talking here about the issues that are going on inside Kyiv, where there are demonstrators suggesting that they disagree with President Zelensky's alleged watering down of the control mechanisms he's put in place for corruption in the Ukrainian government. And you're 100% right. There is no government in the world that hasn't got its grubby little fingers in some grubby little pies and is involved in something that someone would define as corruption at whatever level. And we also have to recognize that the Ukrainian parliament, the Ukrainian democratic process is in its infancy. They have been, Zelensky is the first president that's come in who has come in an anti-corruption ticket. Before that, you go back to the fledgling democracy, and everything was still based on what had fallen out of the old Soviet style of government, but democracy had started. There were elections, but those initial leaders were still underpinned by the corrupt oligarch networks that we see underpinning Putin in Russia today. And Zelensky, he's only had a few years of trying to change things. He was very unpopular when he first came in because of his anti-corruption stance, because he was basically forcing all the people who had power and power through their money into a corner and trying to get that connection between the money and the power and the criminality destroyed. So I'm not surprised he's trying to change things. And Zelensky is turning around and saying that his rationale behind it is to try and stop Russian influence. I think we need to be careful of Russia trying to weaponize the demonstrations that are going on. They'll be doing that inside Ukraine, but they'll be doing that in the information domain as well. And we have to let this new fledgling democracy find its feet a little bit and recognize that not everything's right. Zelensky's grown up through the democratic process, but also that process that was underpinned by corruption. Therefore, he will be tainted. But tell me a politician who isn't. So, Bezer, you come in next, and you say, Philip, would you consider going more in depth as to the nuclear threat by interviewing Annie Jacobsen? Her insights are pretty compelling, and I think that would be very interesting. Bezer, I haven't looked at Annie Jacobsen's interviews, and I would be more than happy. So, Louis, put that on the list for you and Laura to have a look at. Annie Jacobsen would be very good, I think, as we talk the nuclear threat. But let me put it into context. We keep hearing the Russians rattling the nuclear the nuclear saber every time they get to something where they disagree with and they can't find any other way of dealing with it. They do that because they know that it panics some commentators and some politicians in the West, and people pick up on it and magnify it. Western intelligence services, their top intelligence priority, and I can reveal this, I think, is monitoring Russia's strategic nuclear forces. And the whole way through, every time the saber's rattled, they're still monitoring their nuclear forces, and they're looking for any outloads of strategic capability or what would be classed as tactical nuclear capability. There's been no change in status at all, at any time. And this is something that I've got from a number of different contacts who can brief me on what is actually happening. So it is words, it's jaw from the Russians. And when we hear people talking about tactical nuclear weapons, a tactical nuclear weapon over the size of the battlefield that there is in Ukraine is not going to change things dramatically. And that's from a battlefield perspective. About 1 square kilometer being vaporized, up to 10 square kilometers being affected by fallout, radiation, blast, and all the rest of it. The front line is over 600, 700 kilometers long. You'd need a lot of tactical nuclear weapons to have an effect on there. And of course, it's going to affect your own troops. However, as soon as one side uses a tactical nuclear weapon, it has a strategic effect. And Russia is relying on the strategic support from China, from India buying its oil and oil products, and other countries around the BRICS community and elsewhere. As soon as Russia uses a nuclear weapon, then the world will turn against Vladimir Putin, and he knows that. So it's not going to happen. The cost is just too high for him. Until he's in the final death throes of losing the conflict, then anything could happen. He doesn't care what other people think. So yes, Annie Jacobsen, she's on the list. Let's look out for that. Lars, next point from you. War is never good for democracy and leaders in war. No matter how good they are during war. And Churchill is a perfect example of this. He had to put the entire nation and empire in debt, hand over all the technical innovations that were made completely free, and it's not always advantage to have Rome as an ally. Lars, you're right. Yes, I'll agree with you. Wartime leaders tend not to go on afterwards, but that's principally because countries go, we've come out of war, we're going to peace, and they want to change everything from a political perspective. And wartime leaders tend to want to go and have a rest. War is a continuation of the democratic or the diplomatic process, but by other means. It's when diplomacy fails. And you need wartime leaders with a particular charisma to be able to pull people together in a way that focuses the support onto that one aim, which is winning the war. And that winning the war means national survival. That is a different skill set than someone who's needed to rebuild a country, rebuild economics, and rebuild a peacetime scenario. So, history shows time after time after time that a wartime leader tends not to go on and be the peacetime leader. I don't think Zelensky, whenever the war is finished in Ukraine, will be the president afterwards. And probably, I don't think he wants to be. Peter, next point from you. All strength Ukraine. I'd like to hear more about the emerging laser beam defense weapons, UK Dragonfire, US laser items ready in use, land-based or on ships. enormously cost-effective in action. Yes, Peter, I'm watching the development of the laser or the directed energy weapon systems with interest. There's a number coming out, and there are a number being tested on the battlefield inside Ukraine. There are effectively, I'll go into two types. They use the same thing. They take an element of the electromagnetic spectrum, they concentrate it to give it high energy at a particular frequency, hence why laser, and then they target it at things that are coming in, either to disrupt them through electronic means and fry their electronics with some of the EM or microwave radiation laser type systems that are being used. Some of those are not quite lasers because they'll use multiple frequencies but at high energy to fry the electronics. A laser is a single frequency, and this is where we have the traditional Star Wars light beam firing through. But what that is happening, and that's what the UK Dragonfire is all about. That light beam concentrates energy at a particular frequency and will burn holes in things to a point which it destroys their ability to continue doing what they're doing. You burn a hole in a hypersonic missile and it's not hypersonic anymore, and it tends to just fall apart in the sky. You burn a hole in a drone and the electronics aren't too far behind you. You deal with the control mechanisms and it falls out of the sky. The same with artillery shells and elsewhere. It's interesting. A lot of the real detail is classified. So the best way to monitor at the moment is just watch the news. But if we get the chance, we will do a Frontline episode to try and look at these directed energy weapon systems, because I think that would be quite interesting. Another one to note, Louis. Cecil, you come in next, and you wonder if you could tell us the role of Turkey, which is a powerful army. Thanks. The role of Turkey has been really quite interesting in this. Whenever the war started in 2022, it seems as if President Erdogan was trying to cozy up to Vladimir Putin. And then something happened. I haven't quite worked out what it is that happened, but there's a split then came in between Erdogan and Putin. It could have been over the delivery of the S-400 air defense missiles that Turkey had bought from Russia. That was causing consternation across NATO, because a NATO member trying to buy F-35 fighters and other sophisticated NATO systems, purchasing Russian S-400, the Russians' supposedly most sophisticated anti-aircraft missile system, created a real conflict of interest, and there was a danger that Western technologies could be passed to Russian technicians as the Turks were getting their missiles installed. But Erdogan then was involved in the negotiations, and the initial negotiations were around the release of the Azov fighters from the Azov steel factory and refinery in Mariupol. And he agreed with Vladimir Putin that he would hold the leaders of the Azov battalions and keep them under sort of house arrest in Turkey and not let them go back to Ukraine. And then after a period of time, he did let them go back to Ukraine. And now President Erdogan is trying to act as the facilitator for the peace talks that we're hearing. And it seems as if Putin is happy to go to Turkey or send his teams to Turkey, as is Zelensky. But Turkey is also in a unique position in that it controls the entrance to the Black Sea for any military capability going through it. And it has put a stop on military movement through the entrance to the Black Sea, through the Bosporus Straits, because of the war and the conflict in Ukraine. So that's putting real pressure on giving Ukraine a new naval buildup from ships coming from donor countries, but also from Russia trying to resupply its Black Sea fleet in there. And I think the biggest impact it's having is on the Russians. So Turkey in a unique position, a country we have to watch, a country that is flipped from being pro-Russian to being almost certainly pro-Ukrainian in its stance now. What is it out for? It's what Erdogan can get out of it. It's focused very much on what's in Turkey's best interests, but most countries do that anyway. We'll look at trying to get you more detail on that at some stage in the future. Marty, you come in. About time Germany gets out of its bed to fill its role closer to corresponding to its industrial capabilities as one of the G7 economies. Marty, you're right. Germany needs to step up. And in reality, it is starting to step up. It is opening joint venture factories with German manufacturers inside Ukraine. So it's using the real defense capability that the Ukrainians have got and building that. It is refurbishing an awful lot of old Bundeswehr equipment and sending that into Ukraine at pace. Part of the problem is the equipment was in such a poor state; it's taking a lot longer to get refurbished and get it sent forward. Germany's increasing its manufacturing of ammunition and missiles. Politically, as I'm sure you know well, there are difficulties in Germany because of the coalition governments and the way the German government has always been designed to be a coalition government. So no matter how firm the new Chancellor Merz is, he still has a careful balancing act with his domestic politics before he can send things in. I thought it was interesting that Merz turned around and said he's not going to openly declare what Germany is supplying to Ukraine and when it's supplying it now, so he can do an awful lot through the back door without it being in the public domain, which causes even more domestic political issues. Germany has stepped up to the mark, but I agree with you, it's got an awful lot more to do. And Marty, again, indeed, the biggest if is the US president and his TACO approach or lack thereof to go through with deals and promises. Trump's threats keep getting postponed. Also, many other policies got the infamous in 2 weeks deadline before. I think you're talking about Trump's 50-day deadline that he's put on Vladimir Putin to come to the negotiating table with a peace deal. Otherwise, there's going to be 100% tariffs on Russian goods and 100% secondary tariffs on anyone that does deals with Russia. And looking at how Trump approached his economic tariffs, he flip-flopped and changed and stopped them and reduced them and everything else. So, Marty, yes, you're right in expecting that to happen from Trump when we get to the 2nd of September, I think is the deadline, the 50-day deadline for Vladimir Putin to come to the peace table. Let's see what happens. I think the current round of peace negotiations in Istanbul is an effort by both the Ukrainians and the Russians to suggest that they're trying to make progress and to keep Donald Trump on side. The next 6 weeks or so until we get to that deadline are going to be a very long 6 weeks, and a lot will happen. So we'll talk about this again. So that's all for today. Thanks for watching this week's question and answer and posting your questions. Remember, if you want exclusive access to our videos and to have your questions answered, please sign up for Times Radio membership. Oh, and by the way, you can get us now as a podcast. So just go to your favorite podcast channel and search for Times Radio Frontline. Thank you. Goodbye.